everybody. Welcome to Matt Connarton Unleashed. I'm your host, Matt Connarton. Welcome to the television edition. It is Wednesday, September 16th, 2015. And by the way, thank you again to John Hopwood for having me on, co-host with him this week on Ward 13 right before the show, if you're watching us live on Wednesday afternoon. And always enjoy that. And it was great to see, of course, Peter White and Joel Elber from Amsterdam. Always a good time with those guys. And let's see, a couple things. So today, again, if you're watching this live on Wednesday, tonight, I am very excited because, of course, we have the second of our Republican presidential debates tonight on CNN at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. There's also one before that, of course. They have, what they've sort of come to refer to as the kids' table debate, which precedes that at 6 p.m. with just four of the candidates, the minor candidates. And then the main event will be at 8 o'clock. And really looking forward to that. My co-host on the radio edition, Jen Coffey, and I will be at the Trump headquarters right here in Manchester, New Hampshire, which is where I am right now. And we are going to be there. We were invited to a debate watching party. I don't think the Donald himself will be present, but you never know. But Jen, for those who don't know, and we did make the announcement on the radio edition of Unleashed, she is now involved at the state level here in New Hampshire with the Trump campaign, volunteering and doing some great stuff. So she is fully on board on the Trump train, as we say. I myself, of course, continue to have very mixed feelings about Donald Trump. Some things I like about him, and some things I am a bit concerned about. But very much looking forward to the debates. And then tomorrow night on the radio edition of Matt Connarton Unleashed, tomorrow night at 11 p.m. Eastern on IPM Nation 1, we will have our debate coverage. We'll talk about, what we'll do is we'll go back and try to watch the first debate as well, so we can discuss both of them tomorrow night on the radio edition of Unleashed on IPM Nation. So that'll be very interesting. So really looking forward to that. I love the debates. Anybody who's a longtime viewer or listener of the show knows I thought the 2012 Republican debates were some of the best television in the history of television. And so I'm really looking forward to tonight. The last 2016 Republican debate was very entertaining as well. So a lot of good stuff. A lot of new programming on IPM Nation. If you haven't been there recently, of course, please check it out. You might be there right now watching this show. But we've actually split the IPM Nation live station into two channels, IPM Nation 1 and IPM Nation 2. And all kinds of good stuff happening there. So very excited about that. And I want to discuss, I have a whole grab bag of stuff we can get to today. So I'm going to try to move through these things quickly, and I know I always say that, and then I end up rambling about something for a long period of time. But, Planned Parenthood's been in the news quite a bit over the last couple of months. Those videos surfaced, and then, of course, Republicans seized on that with a new push to defund Planned Parenthood. Part of what happens in this whole argument over abortion and over Planned Parenthood is that, as is always the case in politics, when it's, we have this two-party system, and you've got, when you have a two-party system, and it's very difficult for outside ideologies to penetrate that and so forth, it ends up being this sort of binary A-B argument that goes on, where, of course, one side takes the facts and spins them to suit their position, and the other side does the same to suit their position. And so something like Planned Parenthood, because it centers around the abortion debate, it tends to get very emotional, very passionate on both sides in both directions. And so, of course, naturally, the facts are almost always a casualty of such, and everything gets spun. And one of the things that has been troubling to me, and in a moment we have a graphic that we're going to show you, but, I am myself pro-choice, ambivalently so. I am actually in favor of some restrictions like parental notification. I would even go so far as to vote for, if I were to ever hold office, and maybe I will someday, parental consent, things like that. So I'm not necessarily a fan of abortion on demand, but I do believe in a woman's right to choose, and there's a lot of reasons for that, why I fall on that side of the issue. And by the way, some people who are pro-choice would say to me, well, you're not really pro-choice if you are in favor of certain limitations or exclusions to and such, but I think I'm pretty solidly pro-choice overall. And I don't personally like abortion or agree with it. I just don't believe in legislating it. I think it would create much larger problems than it could ever solve. But the pro-life side, when it comes to Planned Parenthood specifically, part of the narrative on the right is consistently this idea that Planned Parenthood should be defunded, with the idea being, of course, they always sort of cast it as we want to defund it because we don't want taxpayer dollars going to pay for abortions. The long-term goal, whether clearly stated or implied, of course, is they'd like to see Planned Parenthood go away. They talk about it, they call it an abortion mill, and it's really sort of cast as that's all they do is abortions. If you listen to your typical, I want to be a little bit careful about that, but a lot of the, because I try not to paint with a broad brush on these things, but a lot of the pro-life movement, the conservative Christian movement, etc., talk about this as though that's all Planned Parenthood does. They're an abortion mill. 99.9% of what Planned Parenthood does is abortions, etc., and that is not true. Now, in the other direction, of course, the pro-choicers try to cast it as it's actually barely, just a tiny sliver of what they do, and that's not necessarily the case either. But I found a very interesting article online by Daniel Kurtzelben, where she kind of breaks this down and tries to find the truth, because her point of view in this blog seems to be that while the right obviously greatly exaggerates for political purposes the number of abortions that Planned Parenthood actually performs and what percentage of the services that they offer, because they do other things, what the percentage is of that is actually abortions. The pro-choice movement and the defenders of Planned Parenthood try to spin it a little too far in the other direction, and because they say 3%, that's it. 3% of what Planned Parenthood does is abortions, which is a lot smaller, of course, than the 94% number that some on the pro-life side have been using. So she kind of analyzes this and tries to find the truth. We do have a graphic, John, if we could put that up, please. And this does come from, in fairness, this does come from Planned Parenthood. But as you can see on this graphic, 3% of what they offer is abortion services. And then you have some other things. Cancer screening and prevention, 9%, very important. Contraception, 34%. Is contraception. Now, of course, contraception, that includes things like the morning after pill, which pro-lifers try to argue actually causes an abortion, which it does not. That is not what the morning after pill does. I've rambled about that on the show many times. 42%. STI and STD treatment and testing, very, very important, and 11% other women's services. So as you can see from the graph, according to this information, clearly, yes, at least according to their data, 3% of abortions, that is a very small number, and flies in the face of what the pro-lifers would have you believe. Let me read to you this, and this has some and this is from about a month ago, but the Planned Parenthood debate, of course, is still raging as Republicans, and you're going to hear about it. I guarantee you'll hear about it in tonight's debate on CNN. Republicans are still using those videos as an opportunity to try to do this again, to try to defund Planned Parenthood. But let me read this blog by Danielle Kurtzelben. It's not very long, but Jeb Bush is at it again in damage control mode, this time over an offhand remark that he made about Planned Parenthood. He said in an event he hosted by the Southern Baptist Convention that Planned Parenthood should be defunded, and he highlighted that he did so as governor. And he then added as an aside, "I'm not sure we need $500 million for women's health issues." That's his exact quote. A statement Hillary Clinton and other Democrats pounced on, portraying it as a gaffe that reveals that Bush doesn't care about women's health. He has since said that he misspoke. So he actually tried to walk that back. But that's not a good, it might get him through to the nomination, but not a good general election strategy to say that women's issues aren't important, which isn't literally what he said, but it's an easy thing to extrapolate that from that for his opposition to use that against him in the general election if he is the nominee. And again, he's sort of, he's trying to say, I think, that, well, we should defund Planned Parenthood because do we need to be spending all this taxpayer money on abortions? But again, if it's 3% of what they do, that argument doesn't wash, no matter what the pro-lifers try to tell you. But Bush's comments raised questions about just how much money Planned Parenthood actually gets, what the group does with it, and whether defunding it would actually save taxpayers money. And this is something I've talked about on the show, and why I think, though I'm pro-choice and though I support what Planned Parenthood does, I don't know that defunding it is necessarily a bad thing if they can make up that money in other places. They do get money from private donations and so forth, and it may be possible to make that up and remove the government from the equation. And Planned Parenthood might be better off in the long run if this is no longer a talking point for the pro-lifers, this shutting down of Planned Parenthood. So in the long term, it might be better for all parties concerned if Planned Parenthood is defunded by the government, if they can make that up. And my hunch is that there would be so much outrage and frustration and upset by pro-choicers in this country and supporters of Planned Parenthood that they would be able to make that money up. That is a theory. I don't know. I mean, I have some ambivalence about it, but I think it might be possible. And if I'm right, if my theory is correct, then in the long run, everyone would actually be better for it, I think. Everyone. Planned Parenthood does receive $500 million a year from the government, but that's just one data point. Here is what you need to know about where that money comes from and goes, and where it goes. $528.4 million is their current, what they get from the government, $528 million. $391 million comes from the private sector, so private donations, etc. So that's still, I mean, obviously we're talking about millions of dollars here, so that's only about 3/4 of what they get from the government. So that's a lot to try to make up if they are defunded. So again, I'm ambivalent about my theory. It's only a theory. All of this is theory. I don't know why we call any of it political science. It's all theory. Well, political science is based on history, so I understand why, but I'm sort of kidding when I say that. Non-government services, $305 million, and then other revenue, about $78 million. I'm rounding up. So the government is the largest source of Planned Parenthood revenue, according to the group's classification. How much does the government pay to Planned Parenthood? Jeb Bush was right when he says that Planned Parenthood receives $500 million a year, or $500 million a year, in government funding, or to be more exact, $528 million last year, according to Planned Parenthood's latest annual report. That totals more than 40% of Planned Parenthood's total $1.3 billion in revenue for the year, which suggests that the organization would be in some heavy financial trouble without that public funding. What programs are funding that money? Now, this is where it gets more complicated, and most things are more complicated than what the left-right paradigm in this country presents to you. The left will present that, well, if Planned Parenthood goes away, then access to abortion goes away, etc., which is an oversimplification of what would happen. And the right presents it as, look, you pay all this money in taxes, and then it goes to pay for everybody's abortions. And, it's all, and everything is very hypersimplified and dumbed down. It's one of the problems in modern American politics and the dialogues that we have, and everything is more complicated than that, and this is an example. Those public funds come from two programs. Medicaid, the healthcare program targeted at lower-income Americans, and Title X, a federal family planning program that likewise primarily serves lower-income Americans. The overwhelming majority of federal funding to Planned Parenthood comes from Medicaid, 75%, according to Planned Parenthood spokesman. Not all of the public funds Planned Parenthood receives are federal spending, however. While Title X is a federal program, Medicaid operates using federal and state funds. States receive a 90% federal reimbursement on Medicaid family planning spending, for example. So when Washington politicians talk about defunding Planned Parenthood, they generally mean cutting off federal money. States could continue to spend as they please. So that's an important thing to understand. But it also is, it sort of goes to my theory. I mean, even if the federal government were to say, well, we're no longer going to fund Planned Parenthood, that doesn't mean that the states stop funding it. How does Planned Parenthood actually use those government dollars? Now, this is important. And again, We'll just go over these numbers again. Abortion is driving the defund Planned Parenthood discussion in the wake of undercover videos from the Anti-Abortion Rights Center for Medical Progress. The group says its videos show Planned Parenthood officials discussing the sale of fetal tissue and have sparked a political firestorm. Planned Parenthood, for its part, says it does not sell fetal tissue and claims these transactions were donations. So again, if you break it down, I mean, we already saw the chart, but 42% goes to STIs and STDs, 34% is contraception. We'll come back to that. And, you know, the breakdown from there, 3% abortions. However, abortions are actually not a big part of what Planned Parenthood says it does. 3% of the services that it provided last year were abortion-related, according to the organization's annual report. For a sense of the scope of that, abortions accounted for about 328,000 of the group's nearly 10.6 million services provided last year. However, this 3% has many critics who point out, for example, that it doesn't explain how much of Planned Parenthood's revenue comes from abortion. Others noted that the figure counts services provided, not patients served, and some patients receive more than one service from that organization. That means more than 3% of patients receive abortions. PolitiFact this week estimated that figure at around 12%, for example. So the reason I bring that up is, and again, it's in this blog that delves a little deeper because, you know, you might go to Planned Parenthood for services multiple times. Hopefully you're not having multiple abortions, however. So if it's one abortion per client, and obviously there are some women who have had more than one abortion, but to kind of simplify things, especially for myself as someone who is not good at math, so that I can understand these numbers myself, if you assume, let's assume as a baseline, one abortion per client at Planned Parenthood, but that same individual is going for multiple services for contraception, or they're getting checked for STDs once a year or whatever. If their calculations are counting services rendered, not individual patients, then yes, that number is going to be higher, and that is why PolitiFact actually estimates the number at about 12%. Now, having said that, that still does not comport with I've been hearing this number 94% from people on the pro-life side, which is just a blatant lie, quite frankly. Again, I mean, they would like to have you believe that 99.999% of what Planned Parenthood does is abortions, and they're an abortion mill. I hear that term used a lot. But 94% is a number that's become sort of en vogue in pro-life circles. And it's not even to call it a distortion or a spin isn't even real. It's a lie. It's a blatant lie. I'm sorry to my pro-life friends, but there's just no getting around that. The overwhelming majority of Planned Parenthood services do involve screening for and treating sexually transmitted diseases and infections, as well as providing contraception. Who goes to Planned Parenthood? Title X and Medicaid programs that target low to middle income Americans, and many of Planned Parenthood's patients are likewise lower income. As of 2012, 79% of people receiving services from Planned Parenthood lived at 150% of the federal poverty level or lower. That comes out to around $18,500 in income annually for a single adult, according to a March Government Accountability Office report. So this is something that provides, and this is very important to remember, Planned Parenthood provides services like cancer screening, like contraception, like STD screening, etc., to low-income people, people who are who don't have the means to just go to a doctor, go to a primary care provider, don't have insurance, in other words. And there's still a lot of that, and Obamacare didn't fix all of that, unfortunately. The 1977 Hyde Amendment dictated that federal Medicaid funds, this is very important, that federal Medicaid funds could only be used to fund abortions in cases of rape, incest, or to protect the life of the mother. However, some states have expanded cases in which they will provide funds. Currently, 17 states allow funds to be used for medically necessary abortions. In those cases that these states count as medically necessary, but that are not permitted by the federal guidelines, states cover the cost alone. That is very, very important. Again, it goes back to what we discussed before, what she highlights in this blog. If the Hyde Amendment, because of the Hyde Amendment, that federal money technically isn't paying for these abortions to begin with. And again, this gets lost in the hypersimplification of everything political in this country, in our political discourse. That is paid for with state funds. What would it mean to defund Planned Parenthood, and how would it save taxpayers money? Efforts to strip Planned Parenthood of public dollars goes back decades, as Kaiser Health News' Julie Rovner wrote recently. The most recent attempt, known as S-1881, would have stripped Planned Parenthood of federal funding and made it available to other eligible entities to provide women's health care services. Senate Democrats, however, successfully blocked this bill this week. Yeah, it's never going to happen. Defunding the group might cut some spending and accomplish one Republican anti-abortion goal, but it could also backfire, as Congressional Budget Office Director Keith Hall wrote this week, in a letter addressing Bill S-1881. Though the CBO didn't do a full formal analysis of the bill, Hall pointed out that while the bill could cut government spending, it could also increase it. While dispatching Title X funding from Planned Parenthood to other clinics, the bill could have cut Medicaid spending, as some beneficiaries might fail or decide not to seek out family planning services at other clinics. But on the other hand, it could have led to more spending, not to mention more unplanned pregnancies. Quote, CBO also expects that some of the services that would not be used if S-1881 was enacted would include those that help women avert pregnancies and deliveries. This is very important. Sorry to inject some common sense and logic in here, but that's what is happening here. Again, this is from the CBO. Reduced use of medical services, of such services, would be expected to lead to additional births, increasing federal spending primarily for Medicaid. In addition, some of those children would themselves qualify for Medicaid and possibly for other federal programs, unquote. To be clear, the CBO didn't come to a firm conclusion on whether more or less spending is more likely. So, in other words, the theory being it's possible. It's just common sense. You limit abortion services, the birth rate potentially rises, and then you have more people on government programs, because who does Planned Parenthood serve to begin with? Low-income people. So now you take away a key resource for these low-income people. They're having more unwanted births and unwanted pregnancies, and now you have more people ending up in the system because you took away the mechanism for them to avoid that happening. And you're not only, if you eliminate Planned Parenthood, let's say you were to eliminate it, I mean, it's unlikely, but let's say you were to eliminate Planned Parenthood entirely, if you take away birth control services for these people, then naturally that is going to lead to more unwanted pregnancy. Because, of course, the pro-life argument would be, great, you take away their ability to get an abortion. Great. Well, you also take away their ability to protect unwanted pregnancy. To prevent unwanted pregnancy if you take away these services. Now, of course, the pro-life argument to that would be, well, they just shouldn't be having sex. Well, yes, unfortunately, we have something called human nature, and taking away their ability to prevent unwanted pregnancy is not going to stop a lot of people from having sex. Sorry, that's just the way it is. well, they should understand that if they have sex before marriage, God is going to send them to hell anyway, so they shouldn't be doing that. I'm sorry. I know I'm getting a little silly with it, but that is what I know a lot of these people are thinking. Okay. Though the CBO... Oh, I'm sorry. Lost track of where I was. Okay. To be clear, the CBO didn't come out with a firm conclusion on whether more or less spending is likely, again, but it's possible. However, it's important to remember that these bills could only cut federal funds. States could still spend money to help Medicaid consumers, for example, use Planned Parenthood services. Of course, without federal reimbursement, it could make those services much more expensive for those states. Abortion rights advocates also argue that redirecting funding to other clinics could limit lower-income Americans' access to family planning services, as other clinics may not have the capacity to handle the new customers, for example. So, again, like with so many issues, it is more complicated than simply pro-choice versus pro-life. There's a lot there. Let's move on, because I have a bunch of things I want to try to get to. Joe Biden, I have discussed many times on the show. I'm always talking about the show. Sometimes I even open the show with, I'll say, the countdown is on. We're only 16 months away from the inevitable inauguration of President Joe Biden. Another clue that he may be getting in, he took a shot at Trump. I saw this pop up today. This is from Business Insider. Early this morning, says here, Vice President Joe Biden blasted real estate magnate Donald Trump on Tuesday. Biden, who's considering entering the presidential race, used striking language to describe Trump, especially the Republican frontrunner's heated rhetoric against illegal immigration. He said, quote, "There's one guy absolutely denigrating an entire group of people, appealing to the baser side of human nature, working on this notion of xenophobia in a way that hasn't occurred in a long time," unquote. Biden said at a backyard Hispanic Heritage Month celebration, according to CNN. Biden was also quoted telling the audience not to lose faith in the face of Trump's sick message. He said, quote, "This will pass. Trump and that stuff that you're hearing on the other team," unquote. Well, I doubt that, but one of the most intriguing storylines in national politics is whether Biden will launch a late bid for the 2016 Democratic nomination. The vice president was long expected to stay on the sidelines, but his recent actions have suggested that he's seriously considering it, even as his public statements have hinted that he's too emotionally torn after the death of his son. But by attacking Trump on Tuesday with such passionate and arguably campaign-like language, Biden could be offering additional hints about his plans. I continue to believe he's getting in. I will be genuinely, absolutely shocked if Joe Biden does not enter the race. And it's late. Again, one of the people, those who are skeptical that Biden will get in keep saying, well, it's very late in the game for him to be getting in now. But I will tell you, every rule has an exception. Yeah, it's late in the game, but in his particular position, it's smart for him to have waited as long as he has. And I think if he waits until, I think he's got to say something this month. It's September. I think he's got to say something this month. But listen, he's been able to sit back. He's been able to watch Hillary slowly implode. Her poll numbers continue to plummet. And I think she's in real trouble. I know there are a lot of people who still think that she is the inevitable nominee. I'm not one of them. I may have thought that a month ago, 6 weeks ago. I'm not thinking that now. I think she is in real trouble. I think Americans don't trust her. I think they're tired of her. I think the Clinton fatigue that we heard about at the end of the Clinton administration, I think it's back in full force. I haven't heard anyone really use that term, but she's never really gone away. It seems like she's been running for president for forever. Kind of like when Romney ran last time. It was like, it seems like this guy's been running for president forever. It's the same kind of thing. Bernie Sanders continued to surge in the polls. He's drawing huge crowds, getting lots of media attention. I don't think he's going to be the nominee, but Joe Biden in some polls doing very well for an unannounced candidate. So, I think he wants to be president. I think he's always wanted to be president. He's clearly someone who likes being at the center of the action. And technically, it is his turn. I mean, typically in politics, when you have a vice president, who has served as vice president for 2 terms, he is the natural next choice. Typically, the VP would then run for president. I mean, there are, of course, we did see a recent exception to that rule. Dick Cheney certainly did not seek the presidency at the end of the Bush administration. He said all along that he would not, and he stuck to that. He wasn't interested in going any further than being vice president. But Joe Biden has never said that. Joe Biden has never publicly said, I'm going to just serve as VP to Barack Obama and then I'm done, because he clearly wants the gig. And I think he's going to get in. And I think it very well could be Trump versus Biden in 2016. Could be Jeb versus Biden. I think it really could be Trump. I told people from the beginning, take him lightly at your peril in terms of Trump. By the way, speaking of getting back to Trump for a moment, CNN has been on the defensive in terms of their coverage of Donald Trump. And this was on HuffPost. It says here, well, CNN's response to that has been he's accessible and he's the front runner. So, what do you want from us? But of course, some people are complaining because there are still those people who consider him a novelty candidate, even though in some polls, he's at 40%. I don't mean 40% in a general election contest. I've seen polls in a general election contest where he's the winner. But 40% in such a crowded field for the Republican primary, very, very good news for him. This was on HuffPost. As the summer of Trump leads into the second Republican debate Wednesday night, the real estate developer will remain front and center. Among the 11 candidates set to participate in the CNN debate, Donald Trump will have the prime spot on stage because he is leading in the polls. But the prominent placement is also fitting because Trump has been the media's runaway star in the Republican primary show, and his candidacy has become a frequently recurring storyline for CNN in particular. Trump has phoned into weekday, evening, and Sunday programs on the network, a luxury only he seems to enjoy, and has given extensive interviews to CNN hosts in the lobby of his own Trump Tower, including one for a primetime special. Even when he's not on air himself, Trump's provocative comments have sparked countless news segments and pundit panels on the network. CNN has also covered several Trump campaign events live, including one that recently bumped a 10th anniversary special on Hurricane Katrina. And CNN did take some criticism for that decision. Last week, staffers asked CNN President Jeff Zucker about the programming decision, the Wrap reported, reflecting internal gripes over the volume of Trump coverage. But with Wednesday night's event approaching, debate moderator Jake Tapper and top executives defended CNN, saying it's understandable that the network would provide airtime to the Republican frontrunner and suggesting that other top candidates haven't made themselves similarly accessible. And there's a reason for that. And Tapper balked at the suggestion that CNN gives Trump preferential treatment by permitting him to choose the conditions for his interviews. He is the front runner, Tapper said. He added that Trump sat down with him in person for a third episode hosting CNN State of the Union and answered every question. Here's the thing. I mean, and I agree. There's more to this article, by the way. I'm not going to read to you the entire thing, but it's on HuffPost. CNN defends its Donald Trump coverage. Trump is, as sort of this celebrity candidate, he's never held public office, as we all know, and he's a TV star. The Apprentice, very successful television star. Apparently, they're replacing him with Arnold Schwarzenegger, will be the next individual the show is centered around. But he's in a unique position because he can be so accessible. The reason these other candidates are not accessible on the same level that Trump is because it's very dangerous for them. They're all professional. Well, not all of them. I'm sorry. Carly Fiorina would not fall into this category, and neither would Ben Carson. But I'm sure they have advisors who are professional political operatives. So they're running traditional presidential campaigns, or traditional campaigns, period, in the sense that they're very careful about who they talk to and what shows they'll go on. And they're not calling into all these shows all the time and appearing on whatever show. Although Chris Christie's been on MSNBC quite a bit, but Chris Christie has the advantage of being right next door in New Jersey, so it's easy for him to go on Morning Joe. because there's been some criticism of MSNBC specifically for having Chris Christie on too often. But again, he's accessible because he's right next door in New Jersey. You'd think he'd be on the road campaigning more, but apparently he's staying close to home for a lot of this. But he can go on MSNBC and talk to a national audience, and there's value in that. Trump is in a unique situation because he's not running a traditional professional campaign. He's Donald Trump, and he's playing that card for all it's worth. And so he can kind of fly by the seat of his pants, go on whatever shows that will have him, be as available and as visible as he wants to be with little to no consequence, because what's going to happen? Is he going to say something out of line? Is he going to say something that someone doesn't like and then one of his opponents pounces on him for? Doesn't matter. He's able to operate because of his celebrity status and because he's not a traditional politician and because I think the timing is right in the sense that Americans now more than ever are completely fed up with traditional candidates. And I think that's why also you see momentum with Ben Carson and with Carly Fiorina, in addition to Trump. I mean, look, Ben Carson in some polls, by the way, is polling number 2 right behind Trump. And Carly Fiorina has picked up a lot of steam. They've never held public office. There's a reason for this. The level of frustration Americans have with traditional politicians has really reached an all-time high, I believe, and Trump is in a unique position to capitalize on that. And he's doing it, and it's working for him. Even when he says things that you think would be very damaging, that would be very damaging to anyone else. Can you imagine what would happen if Jeb Bush had made a comment about Carly Fiorina like Trump made to Rolling Stone? If Jeb Bush had been caught saying about Carly Fiorina, look at that face. Can you imagine that being president? I forget his exact words. I'm paraphrasing. It was pretty close to that. And pretty... not a nice thing to say, to say the very least, but it doesn't matter. Nothing sticks to this guy. He's Teflon. And women who are Trump supporters aren't offended by it. Jen certainly isn't offended by it. The women are sticking by him. They just seem to like that he's so refreshing and speaks his mind, and he's not a traditional politician. And it's working for him. And I told you, again, I said from the beginning, take him lightly at your peril. And people took him lightly anyway, and now he's polling at 40%. He is the clear front runner. The next closest one to him is Ben Carson, who I think is very unlikely to be the nominee. But Trump, I think, may be the nominee. And I think Trump may be your next president. I am not kidding. I'm not making a prediction here, but I'm saying it is possible. And all of you who keep pointing at him and laughing and saying this will pass and it's a novelty and he'll end up imploding eventually, don't bet on it. That may happen. It may not. I am not convinced that it's going to happen. I think he could get there. And he's playing it smart and he's playing it right and he's making himself as accessible as possible. And the media, of course, the media likes that. Eventually, I'm not hearing a lot of this yet. I mean, again, CNN has taken a little bit of criticism for devoting too much coverage to him. Those are the words of other people, not mine. He is the front runner. He deserves that coverage. And he's accessible. He deserves that coverage. Eventually, you're going to hear Trump's detractors start to, and this will be a very interesting sort of paradigm shift that goes on, because you always hear, for example, the media or people who are critical. Republicans are very often critical of what they call the liberal media, and the media fell in love with Barack Obama and all this, and I don't agree with that. Generally, I mean, there are liberal media outlets like MSNBC, of course, but I think, to me, I think that whole liberal media thing is a very convenient Republican talking point that I've been hearing since I was a little kid. But I think eventually, I predict that you will see this very weird sort of paradigm shift where Trump's detractors and other, advocates and surrogates in the media who work for or are advocating for other candidates who are opposing Trump on his way to the nomination will begin to and maybe it's already happened and I just haven't seen it yet, will begin to shift the narrative to the media. It's not the liberal media. It's the Trump media. It's the celebrity media. They're giving Trump all this coverage because he's a celebrity. He's not a politician. He's a celebrity. And that's why the media is so in love with Trump. That narrative will emerge. Now, I don't think it's fair. Again, I stand by what Zucker and Tapper at CNN are saying. I'm with them on this. Of course, if he's accessible and he's the front runner, yeah, you give him the coverage. If he wants to be on your show, you have him on your show. Of course. Why wouldn't you? It only makes sense, and I think the criticism is unfair. But I think you're going to start to see that. You're going to start to see this narrative emerge where others start criticizing the media for being a little too nice to Trump, even though Trump is a Republican. They will play that card. I believe it. And it won't work, and it won't matter, and it's going to look pathetic and desperate when they do that, but they will do it. I really, really believe that. By the way, we'll stay with Trump a little bit longer, very, very quickly. Jorge Ramos from, was he from Univision? I get them confused. There's Univision and there's, what's the other one? The other big media outlet in Mexico, Telemundo. Is it Telemundo? There's a third one, isn't there? I don't know. But he's the journalist. He was kicked out of a Trump event. On his show, he recently was talking about Trump's immigration plan, and talking about the folly. Actually, this doesn't necessarily apply simply to Trump. You could apply this to anyone who talks about deporting undocumented immigrants in this country, because there's still that idea that you need to deport everybody who's not here legally. Some even talk about a path to citizenship, but first they have to go home and then they get in line to come back into the country, which I think is impractical and crazy. If you're going to deport 11 million people, Jorge Ramos did a piece on his television show where he explained the math involved. And this is helpful to someone like me who's not good at math to really explain this. Trump's plan would be we need to deport these 11 million people within an 18 to 24 month period. To do this, Ramos explained that you would have to deport 458,333 immigrants per month, or 15,277 people every single day. And he said, quote, "Let me put that in perspective. That means you would have to fill up 30 or more 747s every day for 2 years. And this would be incredibly expensive." Ramos said that the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency has estimated that it costs $12,500 to deport one person, meaning that deporting 11 million people would cost around $137 billion. See, whenever you inject math into something, it's interesting how you have to kind of weigh that out, I guess, against your principles, right? Or your beliefs in terms of whether you think your stated position is still what you want to stick with in the face of math that may not comport with your stated position. We talk about this all the time on the show in terms of the death penalty, which is a great example. One of the things I say to those who are still pro-death penalty, and I say it that way, those who are still pro-death penalty, because thankfully a lot of people have shifted to the anti-death penalty side in recent years, but it is extraordinarily expensive to execute someone. There's a lot of money. The poisons that are pumped into them are very expensive, becoming more expensive as fewer companies, for moral and ethical reasons, are refusing to manufacture them. The appeals process, what goes on in the courts, and all of that, very, very expensive. It is extremely expensive to execute someone, and it doesn't save any money. It's actually cheaper to keep someone in prison for the rest of his or her life than it is to execute somebody. This is another great example in terms of illegal immigration. If you're one of those people who runs around going, "Oh, we need to round them all up and send them home," well, guess what? It's going to be extremely expensive to do that. And I don't know what you think is, how you think it could possibly be more expensive to just let them stay And again, I'm not good at math, but I'm good enough at math to know it's a hell of a lot cheaper to let them stay than to try to send them all home. Of course, it's fantasy stuff anyway. Now, while we're talking about rounding up 11 million people and sending them home, we also might as well be talking about colonizing Jupiter. You know, it's fantasy land stuff, but we're still forced to have these ridiculous conversations about deporting all these people. By the way, have you noticed that we've been hearing that number 11 million for a long time? You ever notice that? I was hearing that same number 4, 5, 6 years ago, 11 million. How come that number never goes up? You know why? There's a reason for that. It got to 11 million, and then, remember, I actually felt a little badly for him because one of the things that Mitt Romney was mocked for back during the 2012 campaign was his comments about self-deportation. Well, I'm going to stick up for Mittens here because self-deportation actually is a real thing. When the economy crashed in 2008, a lot of undocumented immigrants went home to Mexico because all of a sudden, in a lot of regions in this country, things weren't much better here economically than their homeland. So they went home. A lot of people do go home. So that's why that number has been stagnant, 11 million, for so many years. There's a lot of people who come here who end up going home. Not everyone who comes here stays here. One more thing. I think we got time for one more topic, and this relates to tonight's debate. Might be able to cram two things in here. We'll see. CNN and the New York Times are asked to drop illegal immigrant ahead of the debate. This is according to Gabriel Arana on HuffPost. While the Times has evolved in its use of the term, CNN declined to say whether it would recommend its on-air talent not to use it. This is interesting. This is why, for example, and again, if you're a regular viewer or listener of my show, you know I do not use that term. I don't say illegal immigrant or illegal alien or any of that. I say undocumented immigrant. There's no such thing as an illegal human being, but to refer to them as illegals, it's a term that the right uses because it's a way of sort of subtly, or not so subtly, if you're someone like me who's savvy enough to catch on to the BS, a way to demonize and dehumanize these people. And then psychologically, it's a lot easier to say things like, oh, I think we should send them all home, when you don't even think of them as human beings. And that's why they're called illegal or aliens, illegal aliens, because again, it's the language is used in order to influence how you think of them, which then influences your position. Most people never think about it that deep, so they don't realize that they're being influenced in that way, and then that's why it's so easy for them to not even think of them as being human, and therefore it's so easy for them to have no compassion or empathy for these people. Isn't that nice? That's how it works. Anyway, so let me read this quickly. One of the first things any journalist learns is that when you're reporting on someone accused of a crime, you always use alleged to indicate that the accused has not been convicted and could very well be innocent. Until a court pronounces guilt, it's alleged bank robber or alleged jaywalker or alleged candy snatcher. And yet, whenever immigration issues make it into the news, journalists and media organizations regularly use the phrase illegal immigrant or illegal alien to describe undocumented immigrants, skipping not just the trial, but branding the person as criminality itself. Again, it's that use of the term illegal. And by the way, before I continue with this, I say this all the time, being in the country illegally is not a crime. Crossing the border illegally is not a crime. So this rhetoric you always hear, oh, these people are all criminals. They committed a crime when they entered the country. It's not a crime. Chris Christie himself is on record. He's a former federal prosecutor. He got in trouble years ago with his fellow Republicans for saying, technically it's not a crime. It is not. It's a misdemeanor. It's like a Class B misdemeanor. It's about as close to being criminal as driving too fast on the highway. It is not a crime to enter the country illegally. Just clearing that up for you. I mean, I hate to, inject facts into the dialogue, but getting back to the article, it is for this reason that major news organizations like ABC and the AP have banned the use of the politically charged term, which many in the Latino community regard as a racial slur, and instead require writers and reporters to come up with more precise, neutral language to describe those in the country without permission. According to Michaelo Medina, president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists, quote, "The term illegal immigrant and illegal alien are incendiary and tend to incite fear and hatred. And as a journalist, it's completely inaccurate to identify somebody as an illegal immigrant because you're categorizing a person and not the actual act," unquote. That is very well said. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Of course, according to Trump, they are all rapists, but that's probably not okay either. Ahead of Wednesday's presidential debate, where immigration issues will likely come up, the NAHJ and Define American, a pro-immigrant group founded by activist Jose Antonio Vargas, have asked CNN to discontinue its use of the phrase. They launched an online petition calling on the network to stop using the term, which on-air talent at CNN continue to use, and which also appears in on-air graphics and online headlines. The request is part of a broader push from both organizations to encourage news outlets to modernize their guidelines using the hashtag Words Matter. Quote, "We had noticed in a number of interviews that CNN was really all over the place with the language they used," unquote, said Ryan Eller, executive director of Define American. Quote, "It was concerning because CNN is hosting the Republican presidential debate, and after the last presidential debate, we saw an uptick in negative language being used. What we are hearing on the ground is that this has resulted in an increase in violence and discrimination against people of color," unquote. By the way, we're not going to get through the rest of this article, but it's on HuffPost if you want to see it. CNN, NAHT, which is New York Times, asked to drop illegal immigrant ahead of the debate. By the way, there is as much as I feel passionately about the use of that term, there's this little part of me that feels a little bit icky about news outlets being pressured into what terminology they choose to use, only because while I personally hate the term illegal alien or illegal immigrant, and I don't use it, I also am not a big fan of political correctness, and I think in many instances, I'm so worked up I can't talk, it does more harm than good. So I'm a little torn on this one. I don't like the term. I'd prefer to see it go away, but I don't like when people in the media are pressured or painted as being prejudiced in some way or whatever, or responsible for inciting violence and hatred because of their use of certain terminology. I would prefer that they come to that conclusion on their own, that there is a problem with using that terminology rather than being pressured into it. But by the way, really quick before we wrap up too, this reminds me of something that I wanted to mention. I didn't get to it earlier, but just a quick point. There's this Black Lives Matter movement, and then there's this whole counter movement. In fact, the other day I saw Joe Kelly Levasseur commenting about how much he liked Congressman Frank Ginta's comments when he was on Joe's show, the Ed and Joe show, about, without skipping a beat, when Joe Kelly Levasseur asked him, do Black Lives Matter? He said, well, all lives matter. And, there's this whole counter movement against Black Lives Matter. And the criticism of the Black Lives Matter movement to me is a bit baffling, because the people who don't like the Black Lives Matter movement are trying to suggest that they're suggesting that Black lives matter more than everyone else's lives. So it's like this sort of reverse racism kind of thing, and it's not that. To say Black lives matter is not the same thing as saying Black lives matter more than white lives, or Black lives matter more than all other lives. It's not the same thing. It's simply saying Black lives matter. That's it. If I were to say to you, hey, I really enjoy apples, and you hear me say that, would you then infer from that comment that obviously I hate all other fruits, or I think that apples are the only delicious fruit and that all other fruit is bad? No, I'm simply saying I like apples. I'm not saying that pears are disgusting or bananas are disgusting or anything. I'm just saying I like apples. So when someone says Black Lives Matter, that doesn't mean, it's not the same thing as saying Black Lives Matter and other lives don't. I don't know why. Well, I do know why, because it works for political purposes, why people kind of twist that into something it's not. But anyway, that doesn't mean I like everything that's happened in the movement. But you know what? There's this mischaracterization of the Black Lives Matter movement by its opponents is just so over the top. I hope I made my point with my analogy, but if I say, I like to drive fast on the highway, which I do, that's not the same thing as saying I think everyone who drives slow on the highway is a jerk and should have their licenses taken away. Just thought I'd throw in another analogy in case you didn't like the first one. Anyway, that's it. We're out of time. The debate's tonight. Looking forward to that on CNN. So tomorrow night on the radio edition of Unleashed, Jen Coffey and I will have our complete debate analysis, and we'll go back and watch the kids' table debate too, because tonight we'll be at the at Trump headquarters here in Manchester, New Hampshire for the debate party, and I hear there will be food there. So that's enough to get me excited because I'm always hungry. Anyway, thanks everybody for watching. I'll be back later with Gary if you're watching live on Wednesday. Take care.